Okay, so hopefully some additional people will trickle in, but in the meantime, I have added the link to the Padlet here in the chat. And the discussion today, or the challenge we'll be tackling, is about returning to in-person programming and navigating all that it entails. So I'll just read the prompt here that we've prepared for you. So the challenge will explore how programs are responding to ramping up to be in person again. And all of that entails the logistics, navigating fellows who might prefer hybrid programming as well. And what ways the flexibility over the past 18 or so months has aided to program design, or maybe even detracted from it in some ways, and how will these approaches moving forward be incorporated into in-person programming? And so this is a really exciting topic for me because at IREX, one of the first programs to have back in-person programming is my program that I work on. And so I'm very curious to hear from you all about some challenges and also potential ways forward that we could take what we've learned and incorporate into future programs. So I'll just give you all a minute to take a look at the Padlet, and I'm also happy to share it on the screen afterwards.
Sylvia, is the idea that we would add our ideas to Padlet or discuss them?
Yes, exactly. So we would, I would love to do both. So I would love to discuss, and I'm also happy to capture some ideas if you are speaking at the moment, or you're welcome to input your own. So I was thinking that I would give people just a moment to read through the challenge again, for those that are more like, learners that need to read it for themselves. And then we will discuss together. And I will take notes, and feel free to also include your thoughts in the Padlet as well.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I was switching from studio to being back on the platform. Thank you, Sylvia. I think while Nicole and Sandy, hello, Sandy, I don't think I've met you before. I'm Marcia. I think I'll add something that I know that is an assumption that we're making as we also prepare to have fellows back in person, and that's or not an assumption that borders will reopen fully. We do know that countries are in various stages of vaccination. Some countries are struggling to get access to vaccinations, and then there are those who are really advancing in having boosters. As a matter of fact, I just scheduled my booster shot yesterday. And so I think the assumption as we move forward into in-person is that that there will be equitable rollout of vaccines across the world, particularly where our fellows are coming from, and that is from sub-Saharan Africa. I haven't added that to the Padlet, but to Nicole's point, I will add it. I think I just wanted to also add that to the conversation as well.
Thank you, Marcia. And I see Rebecca Picard has joined us. Rebecca, if you would not mind requesting to share your audio and video, it would be lovely to have you join us up here on the screen as well.
I see somebody kind of plugged in one thing that I was thinking about under the assumptions piece is that assuming that everybody's ready to actually come back to the in-person space and in-person activities. And I think that kind of depending on where people are, depending on vaccine access, right, it really does make a difference in that desire to return to in-person versus being okay continuing in the virtual space.
Can I expand on what you just shared, Nicole, as well? Not just the fellows being ready to come back in person, but institutions and organizations that we work with here are ready to accommodate them as well. In our program, part of the programming that we offer is at the end of the fellowship experience, the fellows being in the US, at the end of the 6-week leadership experience, we offer a select group of the fellows an opportunity to be part of a professional development experience. And that's usually where they're placed with an organization or an institution in certain select cities certain cities of the US, and they're placed there for anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. So the readiness of organizations as well to have individuals come into their space is something that we are assuming they are ready, but it's something that we have to consider as well. And I'm going to hop out of this room into the next, because I don't want to not only not hog the conversation, but also contribute to the other rooms as well. So please excuse me.
Thank you, Marcia.
I'll be back.
Of course. And Rebecca, to bring you into the conversation, we are looking at potential challenges and ways forward for returning to in-person programming. I put the Padlet link into the discussion. You're welcome to open it separately in case you can view it with a larger font. Might be easier to view that way, but I've also shared the screen here. And so far, we're discussing prompt 1, which are what are some of the assumptions that are being made about the even option to return to in-person programming.
This is Asandi. An assumption that I offered in the Padlet is around folks acknowledging the pandemic exists. So acknowledging, and I'm thinking locally in the US, and the political tensions around how the pandemic has become or been politicized. And so that also informs the other assumptions that I shared around vaccination, and whether or not you acknowledge the pandemic may also inform how you move about in the world. If you move about in the world, what safety protocols you are or are not practicing. And so that, like, that mindset also, I think there may be assumptions around, for some of our fellowship programs, because of the work that we and our fellows do, that we may share some political identities, and we may not.
That's a really good point. Something kind of related to this, and a little bit related to what Marcia was discussing earlier, was for a lot of our programs, we're going to need to require fellows to be vaccinated because of the stance of the USG, and that's where we get most of our funding, right? And so, but the flip side of that is that the places where we're placing fellows, we can't necessarily require, an independent organization that their staff be vaccinated, et cetera. So that's been something interesting that we've been talking about, because we place fellows for some programs, for our professional fellows programs, we place them in nonprofits and companies and even government offices all over the United States. And so there, just as you were mentioning, there's a varying degree of belief in the pandemic, belief in vaccines. And so it just feels a little bit icky, right? Like knowing that you have to require something of a fellow that might not be a requirement in the place where they are going, and thinking that through, and how do you communicate that, and how do you balance the decision making, because we also do want to be exposing our international fellows to the full diversity of the United States, right? So it's just something that I don't have an answer to. It's just something that we've been thinking a lot about.
Sorry, I was a little bit late, so if somebody has already mentioned this, I just wanted to add on to that first comment under prompt 1, fellows' desire to gather in person. Going along those lines, we found that we were able to open a lot more accessibility to our programs when they were online, to communities that might not have otherwise been able to participate in our international programs, but they were still able to work with our international partners over the internet. So that's another assumption, is do people want to gather in person, not because they don't want to go abroad, but because they can't, or they have children to take care of, or they're a caregiver of some sort, or whatever else.
Do you all feel like we have discussed enough of the assumptions? Are we ready to move on to our next prompt? All right. Okay, well, let's talk about some potential solutions that we can try to respond to challenges of returning to in-person programming. I see some comments already here in the Padlet.
This is Asandi again. I offered those comments and believe there's power in simply asking folks what they want and need to feel comfortable and safe and about their desire to gather in person. This year, our fellowship was all virtual. And that was informed, our program is at a university, and that was informed largely by the university's guidance and mandates. However, we hope next year, we are affirming next year that we will be able to gather in person, and our intent is to do a hybrid model. So we have not done it. And I'm curious if you all have, or what your thoughts are about that, or some lessons, but that's our approach for the next cohort that will launch next year.
I know I'm the moderator, but I'll share an example here, if you don't mind, Asandi. Because my program, I work on the Global Yogurt Pakistan program, is a State Department sponsored program. And it's a semester one with a lot of requirements. It moves at a very fast pace. So we have done this current semester some hybrid programming, in the sense that the participants were able to come to the United States. They're all from Pakistan, but just vast a variety of regions in Pakistan. But so they are on their host campuses, having to adhere to all of the variety, right, of host campus requirements and rules, and they're not all the same, as we've talked previously. So there are program expectations that they need to meet, and then there are their own unique campus expectations that they need to meet. And where the hybrid component came in is that we normally have two quite large events that bookend the entire experience that are in person. And to minimize movement out of campus, and to minimize us unwittingly spreading, the potential for COVID or et cetera, we held those two events virtually. And so in that sense, it was hybrid, that they are on their campuses, but the two main events bookending their program experience are virtual. And from an implementer perspective, and from the feedback of our donor and sponsor, I think we've done a really good job to capture, the knowledge material and to transfer it during those virtual events. But, our population, our attendees, our participants that we work with are undergraduate students. They very much look forward to as much in-person interaction as possible. So, I think that definitely we've gotten some feedback that they were disappointed to not have the opportunity to make those connections in person, which sometimes can be difficult to duplicate. We've done our best to infuse interactive components to online programming, et cetera, which, people have been pleasantly surprised by, but I think they still miss that person-to-person interaction. So that's been our experience this semester with a form of a hybrid setup.
May I ask you a follow-up question?
Of course.
What modifications or shifts, if any, will you apply next time?
Wonderful question. And we're in the process of determining that. I feel like there are really strong components of some virtual programming that we can retain. It's difficult to duplicate, right, the cultural kind of exchange aspect because we try to always do enrichment activities during the events. But perhaps something that I've been thinking of and that I hope to share, up with eventually the sponsor is that, maybe the length of those workshops can be shorter, right? Because I think there are some wonderful aspects to in-person programming. Like we can get experts to come in and speak that maybe are not able to fly into a certain location. And they can really share a lot of their wisdom. Maybe like it would be hard to get them for like 3 days in Washington, D.C., but they can get it for 2 hours, right, to lead a very engaging conversation that have expertise. So that aspect, I think we could still retain. And sometimes because we have features like even in this platform, like polls, you're able to come in on video and share. You're still being seen, which sometimes in a plenary of 150 people, is difficult, right? And we can't have an expert do like 5 different sessions, right? So they get the benefit to hear from an expert into a specific field, let's say like mental health, for example, just as an example. But then we can have smaller discussions as well. So I think opportunities like that, I would hope that we retain just because it broadens accessibility and who we are able to bring to share their knowledge and expertise with the participants. And then obviously, the piece about like in-person interaction, getting them to speak with each other more directly and infusing those cultural enrichment experiences, that I think still would be wonderful to be able to do with in-person programming. But I love your question because it's something that we're thinking through right now.
Okay. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I was just, one of the things that we have a couple of programs that are kind of a hybrid model this year. We're hoping in 2022 to transition back to a more normal program, but really for some of the programs, we really gained a lot by moving virtually. Like one of the largest fellowship program that we run, the Mandela Washington Fellowship, we partner with 28 different universities across the United States. And in the past, before we went virtual, each university, they had their curriculum. There's a common thread across all of them, right? But each university is designing in a different way, and they're working with a group of 25 fellows. And then IREX is working across. In the virtual space, those universities then started to have access to all of the fellows, and fellows could decide, I want to take a course with this university, So in that way, it was really great. It created, more networking opportunities and more opportunities for the universities to connect with the fellows and the fellows to connect across cohort. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue that in some way, even when we do return back to in-person, by offering supplemental virtual, opportunities or alumni opportunities, like through alumni institutes, which is something that we're going to try new this year, because that worked really well over the course of the past year. But it's the 2 programs that we've done, the truly hybrid so far, is the one that Sylvia mentioned, and another project that focuses on Tunisian students from that are undergraduate students. And I think the common theme with both of those is that they go to a university that has their set policies in place. They have the ability to give students their own housing, right? With our professional fellows programs, where we typically would place them with individual companies or government offices or nonprofits, those we were not able to do hybrid at all last year. We really had to completely pivot, and we're hopeful, but we're also grappling with, and I'm not sure which bucket this goes under in the 4 different categories under the challenges. Then how do you manage cultivate a really great fellowship experience if some of these organizations are fully back in person, some of them are hybrid, some of them are actually only virtual, and and what is lost. So that's kind of the next phase that we're looking at with the professional fellows programming. So I'd be curious to hear what others' thoughts are.
I love Nicole's question because that is the true, right, conundrum when it comes to professional programs. I did want to reiterate something that Nicole mentioned that that has worked really well for us is the ability to push ourselves in how we structure, envision alumni programming, which is, this virtual environment, I think, has opened up a lot of opportunities for us in terms of engaging alumni and seed funding that we provide for them for like small alumni grants, which traditionally has been, oh, you have to organize a community event back in Pakistan or back wherever your home community is, and do that in person. And now we're able to leverage technology more, and then our participants are able to share their knowledge, their passions with a wider pool of people because of technology. So I think it's in terms of engaging alumni and engaging participants in continuation of their program experience. This has been like such a learning opportunity, and actually, like, we've drawn some really good practices that we could use. So anyways, I wanted to reaffirm that point, that we've been challenged to think differently about how we engage our participants post-program and how we stay in touch with them, and then how they share their knowledge. So I wanted to share that if in case it's helpful. But going back to Nicole's question about how we manage the experience when we are working with so many partners who have their unique set of requirements. And if you have any thoughts on that.
I got nothing, Nicole.
Well, then I'm not alone.
I have a question for you. Are your partners identified before your fellows?
No, it's kind of almost like a matching process. So we have the opportunity for partners to apply year round, but really what happens is that we have our slate of fellows and their interests, and then we go out and we form. Hopefully, we're going back to returning hosts that have hosted in the past, but every year inevitably we're forming new relationships and trying to find new organizations to partner with. And one of the challenges, honestly, has been over the last year and going into 2022, some of those organizations just don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And some folks that were like really amazing partners, they just did not survive COVID. And so it's so that's another challenge too, is the tried and true partners, that will no longer be part of the programs.
I asked that question because I wondered if IREX, I presume are you all in the office, or what are you all doing?
We're at home primarily right now. We have a semi-open, kind of like a soft launch for people to be able to go back into the office. But it's a booking system. It's limited capacity right now. I think in 2022, we're looking at going back, but in a hybrid way, right? Mm-hmm. We actually had some good growth during COVID, so we can't actually house all the people, which is a good problem to have. So we will be in a space where people are hoteling and booking desks, and not everybody's there all the time. So,
okay.
Yeah. So, and then seeing how that is starting to work at IREX, it does make me think about what that experience could be like for a fellow if they don't have a consistent like person or people that they're connecting with on a regular basis, and how challenging that could be, right, for them to be integrating into the organization, into the community.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I was wondering about the sequence of fellows and partners, and whether or not you can vet if IREX, if you have COVID, like a COVID protocol, or these are the requirements for partners to participate. And that may allow for the vetting and the screening of partners to possibly have consistency across the experiences if you require, for example, if you require all the partners to allow or to for the fellow to be in person at least 1 or 2 days a week, perhaps. And that's a shared experience that all fellows are having. So that's why I asked about the sequence and when the partners are recruited or apply, and if there's an approach to that. So that is what, I don't know, that's what I got. That was my question. That's the only idea I have at the moment. And good luck.
Thank you. Stephanie, we have you now. Hi. Nice to
Yes,
see you.
I refreshed and that worked. So we have a fellowship cohort that is just about 2 months in right now. We're also a locally based fellowship in Cleveland. Everyone's here. Our approach kind of so far in terms of their placement experiences has just been to be really upfront about what the host site's sort of anticipating, and then matching that before the fellows even interview. So they can kind of opt into also what aligns with what they're wanting. So, you know, if in-person is something they're comfortable with, then they can pick those sites that have that. If 100% virtual is what they prefer, they can opt into the sites that are offering that. Most of them are more of a 2 to 3 days in, 2 to 3 days virtual. Our summer interns, that was generally speaking the format they also appreciated the most. But that we've really just been trying to be as upfront and honest about, like, here's what everyone's offering and hoping for, and trying to mesh that. I think on the hybrid end of things, I don't know kind of how this will come to be, if it will or not, but navigating folks that are virtual or not here at the same time that you're also having in-person people. We're not currently sort of navigating that because we're not all back in our offices, but I think it's easier to plan for hybrid if you know everyone's going to be in person or everyone's going to be virtual. But I also don't know about that middle ground of having both at the same time, and if that's going to be part of programming moving forward too.
Just to clarify, so but that's kind of helpful though, just to have the options. I think we're primarily funded through USG, and so they have like their own rules and constraints on some things. And you know, the idea that there would be a common experience right across all of the fellows, but I think that's an interesting option to say, you know, are you okay with the virtual? Are you okay with the just 2 days a week? Because it allows the fellows also to express their level of comfort. It would definitely open up more opportunities with different types of organizations, because some people want fellows, but they're like, hey, we're not back to the office yet. So thanks for that. I tried to capture what both you and Asandi were mentioning in the Padlet so that we have those good thoughts. Thanks.
I would say our fellows sort of more common thread then is like the professional development work that they're engaged with, that we take a bigger role in facilitating. So for now, that's been a lot of outdoor or like really big space. We had one in person in a big space with masks required, and then staggering that with virtual. So they're all engaged in that, and we've kind of level set that with them in terms of, you know, what are your comfort levels with all of these things, and what as a group do we need to have in place to make this feel more okay? And we kind of just been regularly assessing that. Again, only 2 months in though, and we're not in winter yet.
I think along with what Stephanie was saying, that, you know, it made me think of the different type of supports staff would need to consider when working with this model, and those that are maybe choosing to partake in more like, you know, virtual programming versus in person, especially in terms of partnering with the institutions that they're working with. I'm sure the participants or fellows, however we all would call them, would be experiencing different types of challenges. So we would need to equip staff to be able to respond to those different types of challenges, which could be adding a little bit more strain while navigating an already complex situation.
We also had a challenge of international partners wanting to host in person, but at the sites within the countries that they're in weren't able to get vaccines, and we didn't feel comfortable sending people to their site. And I'm just sharing, I guess I'm not really asking for anything, but I guess my question is, going forward, if we're not able to send people there, how do we maintain the relationship with the site so we don't lose them? And that kind of thing going forward could be complicated for some programs and partners.
Are there any other possible constraints or obstacles that we would need to consider?
I mean, I know some of our decision making is simply budget driven. So, with just thinking about, we're in the process of selecting our partners for 2022 for the Mandela program, and we need people to have single rooms. Before, we used to have like double rooms, right? And that's a huge budget impact when they're at their universities. But also, if we bring them to DC, we used to bring them all to DC for a large summit, and going from, having 500 doubles to 1,000 singles. I mean, it really, it's just, we're reevaluating with the donor, like, what's the value in doing that? Do we need to do that? Can we do that in a different way? And so, yeah. So, I mean, as much as I hate to say it, but budget has to drive some of those decisions, especially with those big gatherings.
Another obstacle, I think, is time zone in terms of hybrid. So if we were to send, half of our participants abroad, and they're all over the world in differing time zones, and then half of them are working in the US virtually, the goal of some of that hybrid programming where everybody would come together and still build that community would be really challenging, I think.
I also think that with hybrid programming, we would need to reconsider what measuring impact looks like. Obviously, we wouldn't reconsider like the goals of the programs and the outcomes, but how we go about measuring impact and the tools that we use. And like, we would actually need to probably reconsider our entire like monitoring and evaluations plan. Like, what are we asking? Because of the diversity of experiences. And that would be complicated. I think it would become complex. Can we ask the same standard questionnaires of everybody, mindful of like the variety of experience? Because the intended outcomes of our projects are what they are, and we always aim to strive to achieve them with the design, with the experience, the hands-on learning that our fellows and participants gain. But again, how we gather impact, I think, is going to be a big question.
And one thing we're spending time thinking about with the various programs is what lends itself to virtual versus what lends itself to in-person. And some of the things that we would have never really thought to do virtually, some of the program teams are like, oh, well, actually this worked quite well virtually, and maybe it could take up less time when we actually have them in person so that we can go deeper and less surface level. So anyway, that's another consideration, right? About, you make the decision to go hybrid, but then what falls in which categories, and which tools are best for the different elements to achieve the most impact that you can.
I do have not a consideration, but an observation from this year for us as staff. The challenge I experienced as a staff around the absence of connection with fellows was, last week I said out loud to someone that I do not like it. Like, there are fellows in our cohort who I knew prior to their fellowship experience, and after nearly a year of virtual programming, I do not feel any more connected to them, which surprised and disappointed me, and was a new experience from previous cohort fellowship experiences. I struggled as a staff person to connect. So that is also a consideration for me as we think about our alumni network and alumni engagement and the transition for those fellows, and they're retaining their relationship as staff with them. So I wanted to share that because that made me think about when you were talking about evaluation, the observation part of the evaluation as well.
So with kind of the last 10 minutes of our time together, okay, let's turn our attention to the last prompt. What we've tried and learned in the past, and then, what are some best practices that we could use moving forward as we all navigate return to in-person programming, in mind with all of the constraints that we've talked about, the considerations that we need to make, what worked for us in the past, or what are some solutions that we can try?
I mean, has anybody else gone back to any in-person at all yet? No. Or you mentioned a little bit, right, Stephanie? So it sounded like use of outdoor space was a good.
Yeah. Our cohort last year was all virtual until we had one like opt-in outdoor farewell. If they could bring like one guest, it was very small. And it was hard in a lot of ways last year. So this year we've been trying to do like a day outside. We have, in a pavilion or an outdoor park space, and then staggering in like a check-in with the cohort that they kind of co-create the agenda for. It's honestly more just like a person check-in than anything else, because that was a big takeaway from last year. And then, like folks have said, an alumni virtual lunch or something that lends itself to be virtual and still impactful.
I forgot, we did do programming. We hosted a cross cohort reunion in August, outdoors. And about 2 weeks ago, we hosted a social gathering for the current cohort of fellows. Our challenge, it was disappointing for both events because the attendance was not what we anticipated. There were a number of fellows who said yes, they were coming to both events and did not show up. I don't know what that's about. I don't know if it was pandemic related or what. I don't know what it was. And neither of these events were a cost. There was no expense to the fellows. So that I forgot about that, but that was what we attempted to do to honor what they asked for. They wanted to be together, and we navigated the university's policies and state mandates to do that, and the attendance was poor. So I wanted to share that it did not work. I mean, we attempted it, but the attendance was not what we expected.
Yeah, Asandi, that's something that I've been thinking a lot about. Is this new kind of, in the last year or so, we've been trying really hard to be sensitive to how people are feeling and how this has been affecting everyone. But then we kind of end up with a commitment issue, and it's like now there's kind of an easy out. As you said, Asandi, you're not sure if it was pandemic related. That can always be an excuse at this point. And I work with youth, so it's even, it can be even more difficult to chase them down. So like, for example, they're supposed to have a report at the end of their fellowship, and nobody is turning it in. And it's like, at what point is it, I need to be respectful of where you might be right now, and you didn't really finish the fellowship if you didn't finish everything that you committed to. So that's another, I guess, we're talking about things we tried. This isn't something we tried, but something we're navigating going into the next cohort as well.
One thing we tried with, this was the virtual, so this doesn't necessarily translate back into this in person, but we did relax some of the expectations, whereas, it might have been for the in-person at, when you're flying to the US at 100%, right? We did relax that back down a bit. And then we allowed for, it was like, I think it was a week or 2 weeks within the programming where we didn't have any new programming. It was simply like catch up, reflect, and during that period, we actually did have quite a few people that we thought we were not going to be able to call alumni, honestly, at the end of the program, who did take that space to kind of catch back up. But that was a lot of negotiating back and forth with our donor, who was kind of like, but no, this is just the virtual program. They just have to do the whole virtual program. And we were like, these people are not actually now leaving their space, right? They're not going to another place where they're removed from their day-to-day job in the same way. Like, it's all happening in the same, probably at home in a lot of cases. And so we did ratchet back the expectation level a bit. And then we incentivized a lot with opportunities that are only available to virtual alumni. So people who went through the virtual program that now have follow-on opportunities that were designed just for them. And that seemed to help, but I'm not sure what, if any, or how to translate any of that into this space where we're returning back to in-person, but I thought that might be helpful to share.
I guess one thing that worked well for us is we also got feedback from the partnership sites on how it went for them. And we did get a lot of positive feedback on the mentors that the fellows were working with really learned a lot from their partnership about working remotely, and going forward, this is going to be a reality for a lot of people. So they had to figure out how they were going to teach remotely, how they were going to engage with people in the field remotely. And we were able to share that positive feedback with our donors as like, this is not just a great experience for the participants, but also for the host sites. So it's really kind of a symbiotic learning experience.
We actually noticed with some of our virtual engagements also that the experience just continued beyond the just very seamlessly, right? Because there wasn't that break in time where you get on a plane and you go to some other event. And so we had a lot more continued engagement post fellowship, technically, between the organizations and the fellows, which was kind of a nice side effect of a less than ideal situation.
Yeah, we also had interns and fellows stay on into the semester with their sites and just continue because it was working so well and they could do.
We have about 2 to 3 minutes here left in our discussion. If you have any last minute thoughts or just observations, even not related to the prompts, but to the topic at hand, I encourage you all to share them.
Just good luck and keep sharing the learning because we can benefit from it. And yeah, that's my ask.
Thank you all so much. It was so lovely to hear from all of you. I appreciated being in this room and in this space with you very much.
Thanks, Sylvia. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.